Good evening. I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Urbana City Council. It's Monday, December 17th, 2018. Will the clerk please call the roll?
City Council members Brown,
Here.
Hazen, Jacobson,
Here.
Miller, Roberts,
Here.
Wu,
Here.
Mayor Marlin.
Yeah.
Here. Next up is approval of minutes from two previous meetings. One is the public hearing of December 3rd, 2018, and the City Council meeting from the same date. Is there a motion for approval?
Yeah,
I
I'll make
move
that motion.
approval of the two sets of minutes.
So moved by Eric, seconded by Dennis. Are there any corrections? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. That motion passes. Next up is additions to the agenda. I would like to add a closed session of the City Council regarding the purchase or lease of property and setting of a price for sale or lease of property, and I would place that under new business item I-4. Is there, do we need a motion?
would be good.
Could we have a
I'll
motion to add it
second
to the
that.
agenda? Was that a motion?
Oh, well, I'm sorry, I thought the mayor made the motion.
No, I can't make the motion.
Okay. So I'll move in accordance with the mayor's suggestion.
Okay, moved by Eric,
I'll second.
seconded by Bill. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All right. All those opposed, same sign. All right, that'll go under I-4. Public input, I have one card from the public from Reverend Dr. Evelyn Underwood. The topic is the Dr. Ellis subdivision sewer problems. She chooses not to address the council, but wishes to express that they're continually concerned about the Dr. Ellis subdivision sewer problems. Does anyone else wish to address the Urbana City Council? Okay. Unfinished business? Seeing none. Next up is reports of the standing committees. Committee of the Whole, Councilmember Jacobson.
On behalf of the Committee of the Whole, I note or state that the Committee of the Whole recommended that the council take a single vote to consider approval of the following items on the consent agenda. Ordinance number 2018-12-079, an ordinance levying taxes for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2018 and ending June 30th, 2019. Also, ordinance number 2018-12-080, an ordinance directing the Champaign County Clerk to abate the tax levy for the General Corporate Fund for the tax year beginning July 1st, 2018 and ending June 30th, 2019. And ordinance number 2018-12-081, an ordinance directing the Champaign County Clerk to abate a portion of the 2018 tax levy related to General Obligation Bonds Series 2012 and General Obligation Bonds Series 2014. So I move that these items previously stated appear in the consent agenda for approval.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Moved by Eric, seconded by Jared. Is there any discussion? There's been a motion to consider the consent agenda. It was made by Committee Chair Jacobson, seconded by Jared. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign.
So the consented, treating these as consent items for the committee, I move passage of the three items previously stated appearing on the consent agenda.
So the motion was made by Chair Jacobson,
I'll second that.
seconded by Dennis. Is there any discussion? Okay, will the clerk please call the roll?
Oops.
Is there a discussion? Oh, Jared?
Jim.
Jim?
It appears one of the items on the agenda, I would need to take a quick look at it, is a bond offering. Is that correct, or no? Okay. I thought somebody said something about obligation bonds.
It's to abate a portion of the tax levy related to general obligation bonds.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, will the clerk please call the roll?
Council members Brown,
Yes.
Jacobson,
Yes.
Miller,
Yes.
Roberts,
Yes.
Wu,
Yes.
Mayor Marlin.
Yes. That motion passes.
For the committee, I move that items, resolution number 2018-12-054R, a resolution approving an option to lease and a ground lease of the Urbana landfill complex, and ordinance
No,
number...
no, no, that was not consent, one by one.
So these are one by one.
Yes, okay, so on behalf of the committee, I move passage of resolution number 2018-12-054R, a resolution approving an option to lease and a ground lease of Urbana landfill complex.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Moved by Eric, seconded by Jared. Is there discussion? Bill?
Yeah, I sent out a proposed amendment earlier today. I noticed that we didn't have a map that showed both parcels, and the parcels that were being asked to lease actually go quite a ways north of the map we saw of the potential solar array. So they go clear up to the Saline ditch, Saline Creek, and there's a lot of, I'd say, naturalized area. It's kind of been left alone for 30 or 40 years, and has a lot of trees, and I thought maybe we should discuss whether we wanted to preserve some of that. So my amendment, I'll go ahead and get that on the floor. Insert at the end of recital A of the option to lease agreement and at the end of recital A of the memorandum of option to lease, the following: owner intends to exclude from any eventual leasing agreement all area within 500 feet of the center line of the Saline Branch drainage ditch. So that's the amendment I'm proposing.
I'll second it.
Okay, discussion. So just a little bit more on that. I think I'm not really, I don't think they're really interested in that part, although I don't know. And I don't think, from my discussion with Scott, he's not sure if they're interested. I imagine what they're interested in is the part that was shown with the fence around it, and that's roughly 19-20 acres. But since our lease agreement would allow them to use that whole area, I thought maybe we should talk about whether we, what would be the advantages of preserving that, if it would make sense to allow that to continue to naturalize. And the way it's worded, I think hopefully it would be agreeable to them. It already went off my phone, but I think it was basically, I didn't put it into the legal description. I said this is what we anticipate, so it's still kind of up for discussion, I think. Did you want to make some comments on that too, Scott?
Sure. So based on some questions regarding the lease option, I printed 3 documents for everyone. One is a zoomed out map that shows the entire landfill rather than just zoomed in on the particular developments that SunPower is contemplating. The second is a single page, and that's the spec sheet for the inverters that SunPower is contemplating. If you look real closely, you'll find that it does specify 79 decibels, and that's at 1 meter distance. Our noise ordinance is, I believe it's 55 decibels at night, 65 during the day, but these inverters are going to be hundreds of feet from the property line, so the farther away from it, the less you hear it. So essentially, it's going to be like an AC unit hundreds of feet away from anyone else, so not a problem. And then the third document is the spec sheet for the solar panels that SunPower is contemplating using. So folks were interested in some of the efficiencies there. And Councilor Brown, as you mentioned, SunPower is so far has not contemplated in the near term developing that acreage. It was looped into their overall lease option, which would be a 24-month lease option. You know, at this time, it's not the most commercially viable property because it would require more site development costs with removal of vegetation. Although I must say the solar market is moving very quickly, and it's hard to predict 2 years in advance.
Eric?
So I guess I'm going to speak in favor of Bill's amendment. I think that it gives us flexibility going forward should should they wish to expand, they can come back and we can talk about that. The public input that we didn't get in public, I will comment on because Phyllis talked to me about it privately, and that is, as we expand the solar aspect of our energy production in Urbana, maybe we should, instead of just being reactive to proposals from vendors or other developers, maybe we should think about where panels should go optimally. For example, the thought that just came to my mind, and I don't know how feasible this is, a perfect place for solar panels, it seems to me, is above automobile parking, because we're not taking any sort of natural vegetation away or the opportunity for it. The cars won't get so hot in the sun, and instead the panels will absorb sunlight and produce electricity. So maybe that's very expensive to do, so maybe that's not economically feasible. But I guess if we keep our options open, we can more readily consider all aspects of this as we move forward. So I will support Bill's amendment.
Dennis?
And now I haven't consulted the city's proposed land use area maps for to look at the Saline Creek, which goes across the edge of this thing, and which Bill Brown is considering preserving by making the access to a 50-foot barrier? 500 foot. All right, so I mean, I would think that the Saline Creek would be one potential resource for public use, recreation, and enjoyment in the future. That might become a developable aspect for the city to consider, and why not, at this time at least, preserve it from being built up against. So I think I'd support your amendment, Bill.
Any other comments? Bill?
Yeah, I'll speak in support. The other thing I noticed, I mean, this 500-foot buffer would probably preserve about a third or a half of the part that they probably aren't going to use anyway. So it doesn't, I don't think, it looks like, I mean, I measured it's a little less than 3 acres, so it's not a big impact on the total 41 acres. But one thing I noticed looking at the historical photos, you can look at all of them over the years, is that as the trees grew in, it also looked like there was a gully that was kind of enlarging down there. So I think it's almost as likely that we would need some of this area to do further remediation as the surface continues to erode, and the water would probably increase speed coming off the solar panels since it's completely impervious. So we might actually have more erosion problems to deal with in the future, and we might need that space either to build detention ponds or do other sorts of control to slow that water down. So as far as the solid waste, CU Solid Waste District, or what's that called?
Cuss words.
Yeah,
Cuss words.
So this landfill was supposed to, I mean, that was only supposed to go 30 years. I remember this was supposed to be the year that it ended or something. Does
Correct.
that sound?
There was a multi-party agreement for management that ended. The 3 public sector parties, the City of Urbana, City of Champaign, and the University of Illinois are verbally in agreement to extend that, but I don't think we've actually
Okay,
written
so that
an
will continue,
extension.
and any revenue that's generated from the solar farm will go to that entity.
Right. What we've discussed is whatever the budget is for cuss words, we would apply solar lease revenues to zero that out, and then any balance would remain with the City of Urbana.
Okay. Do you know if there's any existing plan to do any kind of remediation of either the surface water cause of erosion, or slow it down, or do any kind of detention or anything like that in that area?
I think the intention is to continue basic management practices, so filling in any depressions that form, addressing any erosion, rivulets or gullies, and maintaining a vegetative cap over the clay cap. There is an intention to maintain a number of testing wells as well as leachate collection pumps, but there's no intention to do anything more. I mean, what I've just described is somewhere on the order of $30,000 to $40,000 a year.
That's
I think.
kind of what I remember.
You know, if you're going to dig up garbage, you need to add some zeros.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Are there any comments from staff regarding technical or logistical issues with this proposal?
I don't think that, because SunPower is envisioning these 3 arrays up top on the more flat portion of the parcels, I don't think that this is going to be a deal breaker for them. It does take away some option for them, you know, in terms of it is land. But at this point in time, it's the least commercially viable land for development, and I don't think that they're going to have any problem with that. They're going to continue on with the development as is.
Okay. Any other comments? So do we need to vote on the amendment first? That was made by Bill. Did you actually make your amendment?
Yep.
Okay.
And, Mary Alice seconded.
Second, okay. Okay, so do we need a roll call on that, or just a voice? Voice. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. All right, that amendment passes. Then we'll vote on the resolution itself. That was made by Eric, seconded by Jared, as amended. All those in roll call. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Council members Brown,
Yes.
Jacobson,
Yes.
Miller,
Yes.
Roberts,
Yes.
and Wu.
Yes.
That motion passes.
Okay. On behalf of the Committee of the Whole, I move final passage of an ordinance amending Urbana City Code Chapter 2, Article 6, Division 4, relating to the Public Arts Commission and Public Arts Program, which will now become the Arts and Culture Commission and Arts and Culture Program.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Moved by Eric, seconded by Jared. Any discussion? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Council members Brown,
Yes.
Jacobson,
Yes.
Miller,
Yes.
Roberts,
Yes.
and Wu.
Yes.
That motion passes. Reports of special committees. Reports of officers. Any staff wishing to report? Dennis Roberts, you had a report?
Yeah, it's really just a reminder, or kind of a celebration, perhaps, that it was 11 years ago today that the Joseph W. Royer Arts and Architecture District was created by the passage of an ordinance by the City Council. And the purpose of it is to celebrate the works of Joseph Royer, the architectural buildings of which we have more than any other community in Illinois. He's a locally born and active architect of renown during the first part of the 20th century. A lot of his buildings appear on Main Street, and there is a publicly available brochure on the district, which I'm holding up here, and on the inside there are examples of the buildings which he designed in the downtown area. And I'd like to let you know that we have been able to place commemorative plaques on 9 buildings. And that would be the Champaign County Courthouse, designed by Royer, the Urbana Free Library, the Urbana Landmark Hotel, the Unitarian Universalist Church, the Urbana High School, the Knowlton and Bennett building, which was a drugstore and is now the home of Bohemia. The Lincoln Motor Lodge on University Avenue, and most recently, we've dedicated a sign on the Cohen Building in downtown. So just thought that it would be appropriate to mention that it was 11 years ago on December 17th that the City Council agreed to create such a district. And it's to encourage people to come and visit the city, and while they're here, to enjoy the arts and architecture that's unique to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other reports of officers? I did want to let folks know that this morning in Springfield, the Muhammad Aquifer Protection Task Force voted to approve the final draft of the report. As you recall, earlier this year, the task force was formed after the General Assembly passed a resolution authorizing it. We've been meeting for the past 8 months. We met a total of 25 times over the past 8 months. This was a task force composed of representatives from local governments, agriculture, industry, the research and science community, the general public, and the General Assembly. And the report will focus on ways to protect both the quality and quantity of water in the aquifer, and we recommended legislative actions that we think should be taken to further protect the aquifer. So the report will actually be available to the public soon, but I'm really happy to report that we're done meeting. So and we made the deadline set by the governor, so very pleased. Eric.
I just want to do a very brief addendum to Dennis, because one of the Royer buildings that's very seldom mentioned and is really, really distinctive, and it's just a couple of blocks down the street from me in my ward, is Canaan Baptist Church. Tremendously creative and original use of that particular slightly oddly shaped block. So I just wanted to take note of that.
And that is in the brochure.
Yeah.
And I did talk to them actually about a plaque, but they weren't ready to commemorate their building at this when I did. So hopefully may have another conversation with them.
Okay.
Did I see a hand over here? No? Okay. All right, we'll move on to new business. Ordinance number 2018-12-083, which is an ordinance amending the Urbana zoning ordinance, revising Article 8.3.b to refer to the Illinois Accessibility Code. Plan case number 2358T18. Lori Pearson, Planning Manager.
Thank you. So the text amendment that's before you tonight is really to bring our ordinance into compliance, well, not into compliance, but really to be consistent with the Illinois Accessibility Code in terms of parking. So right now our zoning ordinance has its own rules, and it says, or the Illinois Accessibility Code, whichever is stricter. What we're suggesting here is to streamline things and just refer to the Illinois Accessibility Code so that we're not ever stuck in that instance where we have to make the decision on what is stricter. So I'm going to just talk about the three pieces that are affected here in our current code. And I will say the reason we're doing that now is because there's a recent change to the Illinois Accessibility Code. So we wanted to follow up soon thereafter with this text amendment. So first is the number of parking spaces. So right now our zoning ordinance has its own table that says if you provide the following parking number of regular traditional parking spaces, then you will need to provide a minimum number of accessible parking spaces. So the Illinois Accessibility Code differs really only in two categories. The first two categories, between 1 and 25 spaces, it requires 1, whereas our ordinance today requires 1 between 1 and 20 spaces. And then that second category, of course, would also be impacted. So what that does is it really only impacts parking lots that are between 20 and 25 parking spaces, or 20 and 25 parking spaces. And I haven't seen any of those really recently. I looked at the recent projects that have come in, and parking spaces are either much larger or much smaller. So I don't really think that there'll be an impact here with the slight reduction in the number of spaces for that particular range of lot sizes. So the other, and perhaps the more striking change is that the Illinois Accessibility Code provides a couple of different options for parking lot striping. So right now you can have either 2 8-foot spaces and then a center aisle, which according to the Illinois code now can be shared between those 2 spaces, or you can be a little, you can have wider spaces and then a narrower aisle. Whereas the Urbana ordinance today says you can only do the one that's on the left, plus you cannot share the center aisle. So the Illinois code actually gives you a little more flexibility. You can do things a little bit differently with your layout, and you're also not putting in additional pavement above and beyond what the state would require. So as I said, what I'm suggesting is that the zoning code actually just reflect what the Illinois Accessibility Code calls for, and therefore would allow either of these 2 options, and also would then adopt the table that is within that code. And I will say that the City of Champaign, if you're wondering what they do just refer to the code, and therefore this is the number that would have to be provided. So the Plan Commission considered this. There were some questions from one of the members, and afterwards the member said, oh, I found what I was looking for, actually, that I was asking about in the code, so he was fine. And they recommended unanimously that this be adopted, just to be consistent.
Are there technical questions for Lori? Eric?
I guess this is actually a political question. Are there any rumblings among advocates for people who are disabled that the Illinois code falls short of providing what they need, or is all quiet on that front?
The PACE Center for Independent Living did contact us, and they mostly wanted to know about the parking space, that change, the parking number. And once I described to them the kinds of projects that it would require to get that odd range of parking spaces, and how we haven't seen that size of a project, they were comfortable with the changes as is.
Dennis?
So we have the diagram figure 502.2 and 502.3A. They both show 2 cars parallel parked with a access area between them. And so are you saying that at this time now, if we pass this, a developer can use either diagram to mark his lot?
That would be correct, yes.
All right, so I could see that the ordinance, which I believe that we had currently existing, allowed for a slightly smaller total width of 2 parking spots and access, even though the access aisle is larger. And the state is suggesting that they prefer to have a larger parking width and a smaller aisle.
I'm not sure that anywhere in the code does it say that they prefer one or the other. I think the option on the right with the wider lanes is a little more accommodating to vans, for instance. Yes, technically you could still park a van in the 8-foot ones and then go over into the stripe. That's okay. But it might be a little more intuitive that if you have a user that anticipates a lot of vans, that the wider spaces might be more comfortable for the van.
I see.
So it's more flexible.
So it really depends upon the kind of automobile that's being used on the lot.
Right.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Is there a motion? Mary Alice?
I had a quick question.
Okay.
So what was the rationale for us to have the parking spots in terms of, can you go back to the slide in terms of the number? There we go. So the first 1 through 20, 21 through 50, I mean, when we did that, everything else is by 25. So what was the rationale for those lower 2?
My best guess is that we do have something else in the zoning ordinance for parking lots of more than 20 spaces. So oftentimes we're consistent in that, oh, okay, if parking or 20 parking spaces is a trigger for this other thing, let's make it the trigger for this thing. That's my best guess.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Is there a motion?
I'll move passage of this item.
Second?
I'll second it then.
Moved by Eric, seconded by Dennis. Further discussion? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmembers Brown.
Yes.
Jacobson.
Yes.
Miller.
Yes.
Roberts.
Yes.
And Wu.
Yes.
That motion passes. Next up is ordinance number 2018-12-084, an ordinance amending the Urbana zoning map to rezone 307 South Busey, 401 South Busey, 403 South Busey, 802 West Illinois from R4 to R5. Plan case 2357M18.
I would like to introduce our newest planner. This is Lily Wilcock. Some of you may have seen her as a member of BPAC previously, so she is now joining us on this side of the table. And she's going to take
Welcome.
it away.
Welcome.
Thank you, everybody. So I am here to tell you a little bit about the ordinance amending the Urbana zoning map. As we already discussed, the properties affected are going to be right here at Busey and Illinois Street, these 3 parcels. They are on the west side of Busey, and they are just north of Illinois. This is one of the parcels. There had been a little bit of confusion, so I wanted to just show you guys really fast the 3 parcels that are here. This is one of the parcels properties, and then this is one of the parcels. And so with that, I'd like to talk a little bit about what staff has found out in Plan Commission. Property owners of the 3 parcels have petitioned the city to rezone the parcels from R4 medium density multiple family residential to R5 medium high density multiple family residential. Property owners cite continued growth of the university's student body, and the rezoning would match existing zoning for the block in the comprehensive plan, and additionally, the R6 property to the south. Plan Commission has reviewed the proposed zoning map amendment to determine whether the proposed zoning map amendment satisfies the LaSalle Sinclair criteria and recommended to City Council to approve the zoning map amendment. Staff recommends the proposed zoning map amendment be approved as well. I will show you really fast. Here is the current zoning, which is at R4 in the hatched area. And then you've got a block of almost completely R5, and then you have B1, which is the Circle K up at Green and Lincoln. And here is the future land use map. So this is from the 2005 comprehensive plan, and it shows multifamily residential. That it would be in line with what we are proposing today. So the 2005 comprehensive plan notes that, 2005 notes that it's multifamily, but the potential uses between the current R4 and the proposed R5 are mostly the same. That it was part of the packet was differences chart, and almost all the uses that one can have on an R4 property are similar to R5. Several of them will be conditional or special use, and with those that would trigger another hearing. The biggest differences between the two are floor area ratio and open space ratio. As it does discuss, and we discussed at Plan Commission, the properties were downzoned from R5 to R4, and because of that, some of the properties were not necessarily in compliance with the floor area ratio and open space ratio. The downzoning was cited for several reasons to support. It said severe parking shortages and are located in the area where sanitary and storm sewers may have insufficient capacity to accommodate the increased demands resulting from new high-density multiple-family residential development. That was done in 1991, and there have been a lot of improvements to the stormwater and sanitary, as well as we've made some changes to our requirements for development in requiring a stormwater management plan. Also, last year, staff in the planning division, we went out and we talked to a lot of the multifamily residence landlords, and we talked to them and asked them about parking situation, and there was no immediate parking concerns for that area, as well as we pulled the most recent on-street parking permit uses, and on the blocks, only 10 on-street parking permits were pulled out of 22 available spaces. So parking and sanitary and storm sewer concerns were addressed. So the city engineer for development, the assistant city engineer for development has indicated the increase in density from R4 to R5 for the site would generate a near negligible increase in sanitary sewer flows. And that's a proposal if there was a plan for development. The Plan Commission did go through and address each and every one of the LaSalle criteria for rezoning. And with those, there's a lot of X'd out information on my end. We did find that the Plan Commission did find that they wanted to send to City Council for a recommendation for approval. So the summary of staff findings for this, and I'm just gonna, summary of staff findings at the December 6, 2018 Plan Commission meeting. There were 5 A's and 0 nays to forward the case to City Council with the recommendation to approve. Our staff findings was that Jonah Weiskopf, part owner on behalf of AGRJ Investments LLC, has petitioned to rezone the 3 parcels, 307, 401, and 403 South Busey, which is also known as 802 West Illinois Street. The properties would be rezoned from R4 to R5, as discussed previously. The proposed rezoning is consistent with the 2005 Urbana Comprehensive Plan, and the proposed rezoning generally meets the rezoning criteria. The options for City Council is 1, either approve the ordinance as presented, 2, approve the ordinance as modified by specific suggested changes, or 3, deny the ordinance. Based on the evidence presented in the discussion above and without the benefit of considering additional evidence that may be presented at the public hearing, staff recommends the Plan Commission forward case, has already forwarded the case, and for the City Council to approve the proposed rezoning.
Are there technical questions for the Planning Department? Mary Alice.
So I was looking over the comprehensive plan, the campus and downtown plan, which I know has been superseded by the comprehensive plan 2005, and some of the items here. And so one of the things that you brought up was the reason it was originally downgraded was due to the pressure of the parking and due to the concerns about the sewer system. But in addition to that, if I read, this is in Exhibit D here, I think is what you provided in the packet. It also says that these are suitable and appropriate for new medium-density apartment development to provide opportunities for new housing near the University of Illinois, and they are under increasing pressure for both new high-density residential development and would be damage the residential character and density of the adjacent neighborhood. So that's also a part of it. So here's my question. If you wouldn't mind pulling up the existing land uses, sorry, there's one with yellow and blue, lots of colors.
There's
It's
so
not
many
this
colors.
one. There are so many colors.
Oh,
There we
referring to
go. Thank
zoning?
you.
This is
Okay.
zoning, yes.
Thank you, zoning, I'm sorry. So if you look at this map here, and you look at just to the east of the proposed changes, you have R2, right? You have R5 on almost the entire block here. So my question as planners, what is an appropriate buffer to R2 in terms of zoning?
So there's different ways to get at that. And certainly, one could look at the map as it is today, the zoning map, and say, hey, yes, that R4 is a buffer. What we do is, in addition to looking at surrounding zoning, is that we do also look at what's on the ground today. So, and that's why we're looking at the apartment, high-density apartment that's to the east, and then the already rented single-family residences that are immediately to the east, and thought that it's not quite, the need for a buffer isn't quite as strong there because of the existing uses that are across the street.
Yeah, and if you want to go through them, just across the street, there's a legally non-conforming high-density apartment. You have 2 single-family homes in a row, and both of them are rented. So just to complement what Lori said, this buffer, it is buffered right now from the single-family residences in the neighborhood.
But R4 would be an appropriate buffer, is that correct? Just from a planning standpoint, if you think about a buffer.
If this
to the
was in a
single-
vacuum and there were, single-family houses across the street that were family and you felt like they were feeling a lot of pressure to become, then yes, that could be a case for a buffer. But this is actually currently, this is west of Busey, so it's already kind of considered in the heart of the multifamily residential parts of the neighborhood.
And one thing, if I may, Ms. Wu, is in looking at the other parcels that were a part of this down zoning, it wasn't as though it was this whole, and you all can't see what I'm doing, so let me do this. It's not as though it was like, hey, we're redoing this whole area. It was, these were grouped with ones to the south, to the, it seemed, I'm not going to say random, but it didn't seem to be very scientifically laid out in terms of area. It's sort of just said, hey, if you have on the ground smaller buildings, what maybe were built as single-family residences, we're going to group you together in this section of the down zoning. So it didn't really, in my mind today, looking at it 30, whatever it is, nearly 30 years later, it doesn't seem like they took the context in when they made this determination. So I apologize for anyone that might be sitting around the dais that was here at that time.
And then, just as I'll leave some of my comments for later after we get through the questions and let other people ask questions.
Technical questions. Eric?
Well, I guess this is a comment that...
Well, do you have a question? Yeah.
No, okay, sorry.
Questions? Dennis and then Bill.
So I can't remember, is this part of the Busey corridor that was part of the planning process in years past?
It's immediately north. It is
It's
not
north
part
of
the
that.
corridor.
The Busey corridor is north of that, okay.
Bill?
So that high-density apartment just to the south of R6, do you know if that was there in 1990, 91 when they did the rezoning?
Based on the architecture, I think it was, and that zoning didn't change.
And that's like 4 stories or something, 4 or 5?
Do we have a-
Yes, it is like 4 stories, and this is something that wouldn't change between the two zoning districts. R4 and R5 is the 35
So
feet high, maximum height for a building structure. I would agree. I'm not for sure about when the building to the south was constructed, but I think it was before 1991.
okay. I was just looking at the R6 and then to the west of that is R4. It would seem weird to have it the density go down as you go west. So I assume the big building was already there and they didn't
Yeah,
upzone that.
Dennis?
One more question. Does Joan Weisskopf, is he the owner of all 3 parcels at this time?
He's part owner, and he is here for specific questions if you have them.
All right, so I could only, well, I guess in the zoning discussion, it's not germane about what might happen in the future, but I was just sort of wondering.
You're correct. Yes. Any other questions for the planning department? Is there a motion to get this on the floor, and then we'll have discussion and comments?
Excuse me, I'm not sure if Mr. Weisskopf would like to address you as the petitioner. He has the ability to do that.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Do you
Sorry,
have
just
questions for Mr. Weisskopf?
Sure, why?
Dennis?
Do you want to share your vision of how the zoning might affect the future of the plots that are on Busey Avenue?
Do I sign anything or no? Do I sign anything? No. Okay. Yeah, so there is no current project in the queue, it's sort of teed up. This probably makes that possibility slightly more likely. Some of it was mentioned. I think that the main difference is in the floor area ratio between R4 and R5, which takes you from, I think, a 0.7 to a 0.9, which ends up being a little more livable space. If and so that area gets developed, there's a little more density there. It's also in the opportunity zone. The federally designated opportunity zone is running on the 800 block. That also makes it more likely, possibly there will end up, this will incentivize potential development. But at this point, there's nothing in the teed up. I don't know if that that really gets to your question.
And so I guess maybe I was just wondering, there's a difference between being the property owner and being interested in development.
Mhm.
So are you hoping that someday you will develop this property?
I would not say no to that. I suppose I do hope that. I'm co-owner of 802 West Illinois and 307 South Busey, and then I'm also coordinate with Bob Schimmel, who is the owner of the one in the middle. So I can't say for sure whether that would happen, but I mean, I certainly would be potentially excited to do that if it were a possibility.
Any other questions for Mr. Weisskopf? Okay, thank you very much. Is there a motion?
Mayor,
Yes.
may I ask a follow-up technical question?
Sure.
Okay. I don't know if Lori or Lily would like to answer this question. So I have two. The first one is I know we usually look at the LaSalle criteria.
Mhm.
How does the Sinclair factors
Yeah, so
apply to
there's
this?
the last 2 out of the 6 in there are the Sinclair factors, and they were a couple years, I think, afterwards. There was a pipeline coming through in northwest suburbs. Anyways, that's where we really established the wellness and how it affects. Is this going to hurt the wealth of the health of the community? So those 2 factors. I'm sorry, what was your question besides what were they?
So normally when we talk about zoning changes,
Yeah.
we're told that we have to only apply the LaSalle criteria in order to make our decision in terms of whether or not those are met. So I'm curious how the Sinclair that are mentioned in here play into that.
It's part of the same grouping. So previous years, we haven't relied on Sinclair, but in more recent cases, we have been including them, as that's the standard practice in the state. So when we say LaSalle criteria, that's just like calling tissues Kleenex. It's the whole, it's everything.
It's part of
Yes.
it's an expansion. Can I call it an expansion of LaSalle? Clarification, one of those two?
Right.
Okay, all right. My second question for the planning department. We have this conversation a lot, and I'm still struggling to figure out the difference between medium density and medium high density, because I think that that is always a point of confusion when we look at the future land use and the comprehensive plan, because where one group might say, well, this is high density, and the other group will say, well, no, it says medium density. There really is no delineation between those two in the comprehensive plan and the future land use.
I completely agree with you. I completely agree with you because I'm new, and for sure. And that's if you go to your Exhibit F. I hope that's helpful a little bit.
Well, let me just interrupt you, Lily, if I may.
Please do, yeah. for
I
sure.
think Councilmember Wu is asking specifically about the comprehensive plan versus zoning. So the
Oh.
comprehensive plan is more of a general document, so it, by design, doesn't get down to real specifics. In some cases, it does list things like medium density, and that I think really is only limited to the Lincoln-Busey corridor where it got that specific. That is unusual for a comprehensive plan to be that specific. Normally, it's more broad brushes of, it would just say multifamily. So it was, it got down to that level of specifics for that corridor because of outreach into the neighborhood, I believe. So also, that goes into how zoning then is determined. If a comprehensive plan is general, it then relies on zoning to be assigned based on the context. So it's not formulaic. It doesn't say, if you are multifamily, then you should be able to do X, Y, and Z. It more says, the multifamily development should be kind of like this. And then therefore, it's up to the city council or whoever the body is to determine what is the appropriate zoning so that it is consistent with the comprehensive plan. So it's kind of the general, the clouds, down to the nitty-gritty and the legal. So it's a continuum to figure out how to get from one to the more specific.
So it's a fluid definition when we're talking medium versus medium high.
Well, it's
That's kinda
fluid
what
in
I'm hearing.
terms of comprehensive planning, but in terms of zoning, it's very specific. And in this case, for instance, we did the calculations, and I think the change in FAR would be about 4,400 square feet if all 3 lots were to redevelop. It would be an additional 4,400 square feet. So whereas the medium density zoning you know, that sounds medium and it sounds small. The medium-high isn't all that much higher.
So approximately, what, you said 4,400?
Square feet of
Square
extra
feet.
building could be constructed. yeah.
So anywhere from 4
4
to
units.
8 units,
Those would be
depending on
tiny
how
units.
small, little efficiency units.
Which
Sure.
we posed the question to, as far as stormwater was concerned, to Public Works, and that's where we kind of got the near negligible difference between the two, too.
Okay.
And other things in zoning are the same, such as the height, as Lily mentioned earlier. So it would really just be the bulk, the footprint, and it's a smaller amount of open space. But the more building you build, the more open space you need to have. So that might actually balance out in the end.
I think the front yard setback is identical, 15 feet, and it's the backyard setback that is different. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah, I think it goes down from
And it'll be
25.
back up to existing R5.
Yeah, and like I said, a lot of the properties are not in compliance with those kinds of
There are a lot of
factors.
properties in Urbana that aren't in compliance with something. All right, I'm
Yeah.
done with my technical. Thank you.
Any other questions? Is there a motion?
I'll move passage of this item.
I'll second it.
Moved by Eric, seconded by Jared. Discussion or comments? Eric?
I think the only thing I would say about, critiquing zoning decisions that were made in 1991 is that was a period, decades ago, when there was real concern to an extent that's greater than we have now about the stability and viability of West Urbana neighborhoods. And so people made decisions and said things that were passionate. And and I think we more or less came out at a pretty good place, but there were a few little quirks in how decisions were made.
Mary Alice?
Well, it's probably not a surprise that I'm concerned about this. And I'm concerned about it for a couple of reasons. The first one is it's just north of the Lincoln-Busey corridor, and that one is has a very good process in place. Maybe we could do some improvements, but it definitely has a lot more information that allows us to kind of determine whether or not a rezoning of a property would be appropriate for the neighborhood. This one is literally across the street from that. So while the Lincoln-Busey corridor guidelines do not apply to this area, I think that some of the principles can be taken into account. One of the reasons that was put in, the Lincoln-Busey corridor, is because there was a lot of concern in West Urbana in terms of the encroachment, in terms of buffering that neighborhood, which is the last neighborhood left in Champaign or Urbana, which abuts the university system. That said, I think what we've seen going on in our community is that there's been a lot of development going on close and kind of clustered in Campus Town. There's a lot of concern that that is starting to move across Lincoln Street into the 800 block, the 700 block. And one of those concerns arises from the older housing stock. And so we talked about this a lot in our council priorities. And I think that this is an opportunity for us to think, are we encouraging people to let older housing stock go so that they can be rezoned and we can have a new building on there? I'm not saying I'm necessarily against this. I'm saying that we need to be cautious about having a buffer zone between the residential areas. We need to be thinking proactively on how we can encourage people to keep up this older housing, not encourage developers to knock it down and build a new building. So I would just like to re-emphasize that I do have a strong desire for council to address this, as we talked about it in our goals earlier.
Thank you. Bill?
Yeah, I think as far as the increase in density, it's probably not that great, and I'm probably going to vote for it. So, but as far as preserving old and housing stock, there's been I've thought about that quite a bit and looked at the non-conforming uses, and that was really what was supposed to help preserve the old housing stock, because if something happens to something that's a non-conforming use, like a house that's currently being used as apartment building or duplex or something, and it burns down or it gets condemned or something, they have to tear it down. All you can build there is single-family homes. So that's kind of an automatic incentive for those people that own those to try to keep them up. It doesn't always work. Some people let them run down, but I think for 20 or 30 years, it's been working fairly well. So I wouldn't be too critical of what happened in 1991 compared to. I know there were similar discussions in the Scott Park area in Champaign, and they went the other way, and it's very valuable now, but it's also replaced a whole neighborhood. And I don't think I think what we have in West Urbana is pretty good, and it may not be as valuable per acre, but I think it brings something different, a really good place to live, and especially if you're affiliated with the university, really convenient and transportation oriented as far as walking and biking and things like that. But yeah, for this particular density, it seems reasonable. The R6 to the south is right across the street from R2s. I don't know, if there's been a problem with that, with the people that live across from that, but it seems like living across from R5 definitely wouldn't be worse than that. And they're already being used as multifamily, although, that one, the one on the corner that is non-conforming, presumably that could go back to single family. I don't know, if it economically would. You'd think that if something happened to it, somebody may try to get a duplex, but that'd need special approval, I think, R2. So yeah, I think that's all I had on that. Thanks.
Dennis?
Yeah, Mary Lou, I totally appreciate your interest and concerns that you express about buffering for the communities that are to the east, because certainly in many of the neighborhoods that I represent, the East Urbana neighborhood, we are also sometimes very anxious about having development and how it affects, the R3, which was you actually have a lower density ratio within R2. So we allow R3 throughout most of our East Urbana neighborhood. So I guess I'm not immediately against this proposal, but I think that it is important to talk about preserving housing stock. Certainly in the West Urbana neighborhood, which is considered to be one of the most enjoyable and highly rated neighborhoods in the nation, according to some statistics, and a walkable environment, and it has many amenities that allow it to be enjoyable for people who are coming and going from the university into the immediate residential areas. It has an important standing in the community, and we don't want to erode it. Having, if indeed the two older buildings that are either to the north and south of the hexagonal building were to go, it would be kind of a shame, and yet they are endangered, I guess, ultimately by the zoning potential that we are considering. So that is a concern for me as well. I don't know if you have had strong opinions shared by the community in the discussions, because I'm not aware of those. But if you wanted to talk about their concerns, I'd be open to listen to them. But certainly I think that we should consider how we can preserve best the housing that we have that's unique and older, because it really is what makes many of our neighborhoods quaint and beautiful.
Eric?
I guess the only thing I'd come back to, I hate to come back to legalisms, but we have to abide by the LaSalle criteria. So we would need, I think, to argue against this, we would need some pretty explicit definition of the harm that could potentially occur. So I guess I would suggest that as far as, considering encroachment into older neighborhoods, that it might be worthwhile to formulate some explicit document for how, what we think might be potential harmful effects of certain kinds of development adjacent to certain residential areas, so that those could be cited if one wanted to invoke that particular one of the LaSalle criteria. And so I'm looking at Jim because I'm venturing, outside of my legal competence in this. But am I on the right track, Jim?
Let's put it this way. If somebody's inclined to vote no, as you say, they're going to have to justify, and the analysis that you all should apply is the LaSalle criteria and Sinclair, which, as Lori indicated, lumped together is referred to as the LaSalle criteria. By the same token, you can't go outside that. You can't bring, and in the past there has been some of that. I think it's been more clarified to you more in recent years on your analysis. You have to confine your analysis. Am I encouraging you all or any one of you to vote yes or no? No, that's your vote, not mine. But if you do, it has to be it should be based on LaSalle criteria. Now, mind you, the analysis doesn't require satisfaction of every single criteria. It's more or less, as we would say in the law, a matter of preponderance. And because there are certain number of LaSalle criteria, if one, unless it is so major that that truly affects the area, one criteria knocked out wouldn't end up, necessarily providing basis. The problem is one person's analysis and where they end up, and another person's analysis they may reach a different conclusion. So you have to, you're right, you have to stay within the LaSalle criteria.
Mary Alice.
This is one of the reasons I brought up the Sinclair factors, because they're apparently an expansion of the LaSalle criteria, right? One of the very first LaSalle criteria, Sinclair factor number 1 is the community's need for more of the proposed use. We've had this conversation for several housing developments that have come up before this committee and council within the last year. I think that what we have determined is that it is market forces. People decide whether or not there's a need. But how are we, as people who aren't investing in this land, people who are just purely zoning it for appropriate purposes, supposed to be able to apply that? One of the things here is that the properties is close to the University of Illinois campus with 45,000 students, and the applicant has stated that medium-high density housing is in demand in this area. So that's one part of the application. What criteria can we use to evaluate that if that is part of the Sinclair factor number 1? Is there any criteria that we can use, or is that just market forces? Is that just kind of a given? If a business says, yeah, I want to build, then that's my question.
Well, I mean, it's one thing to say there are market forces. It's another thing. It's another thing to say, what is the basis for that assumption? That is a market forces. There are market forces. That's a conclusion. That's not a fact until somebody presents evidence as to that fact.
So in this case, the evidence is that there's an increase in student population, and therefore the market forces demand more housing. That's my reading of this.
I mean, if you're asking how I would probably try and prove it in court if I had to, or disprove it, it's one thing to say, yeah, there's an increase in population, but is there an increase in demand? And I'm not arguing for or against the ordinance. I'm just talking about how I would prove it in court, one way or the other. Is there, or defend against it, is there market force in the general area under consideration as opposed to Urbana or Urbana-Champaign. What are those market forces? Are the market forces for updated residential of the kind that's there, or are there market forces for higher density? I can't tell you what the facts are because I don't know. You know, I've not invested in this process on this or any of the projects. What the market force? Fact that somebody buys a piece of property and says, "I want to develop it this way," that's a whole different set of issues because you have to remember you are dealing with whoever owns the property with a person's constitutional right in terms of how he or she generally uses their property. That's not to throw out the planning process. That's why the LaSalle criteria are there for a rational consideration of a request. But I can't tell you in terms of this property or right around there what those market forces actually are because I don't know.
Bill?
I guess another thing I'd look at is if you assume there is a market for newly constructed, recent built apartment buildings, there's very little in that vicinity existing. So I think that would be probably an indication to me that area lacks that type of housing. So I think it'd be hard to argue against or use that as an argument that we have too much of that kind of housing because we don't have it there. The other thing, if increasing density by this small amount increases the value of the property, it also makes it less likely to be used as a church or being taken over by the university. We probably don't have to worry about the university coming across Lincoln Avenue, but that's probably what they said about Goodwin Avenue at some point in the past. So I think it wouldn't hurt to get a little bit more of a moat there.
Jared?
Lori, I don't know if this is something easily accomplished or not, or maybe it's something we can research, but perhaps it might be useful to have some sort of visual reference to watch what has happened there over the last 40 to 50 years, how zoning has changed and how we've gone from, I'm assuming everything was probably R2 at some point in time, to where it is today, and if we can see, maybe in the last 10 years that it's changed significantly, or is it small changes here and there? Because that might help us see, okay, well, here's the encroachment, here's where it's going, or are we kind of holding steadfast in our use there?
Eric?
So I can just very broadly say over a long sweep of history, because we've lived in our home since 1971, and there very, very early on, when we moved there in the 1970s, the city comprehensive plan said that our entire area was going to be raised and was going to be given over to, to multifamily housing. So there was a movement by people who owned homes, lived there, for downzoning. And there was a tremendous fight about that, and very passionate. But that was the time period when there was a significant amount of downzoning. And that probably saved West Urbana. So, and so these discussions we're having now, which are very nuanced and rational, I think, and good, but it's really in that context. And of course, hardly anybody remembers that history anymore because I'm older than almost anybody. But that was the battle for West Urbana.
Most of West Urbana is R1 and R2.
Yeah.
So you're just talking about that strip between Lincoln and Busey. Most of it is protected by R1 and R2. Any further discussion? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmembers Brown,
Yes.
Hazen, or Jacobson,
Yes.
Miller,
Yes.
Roberts,
Yes.
Wu.
Yes.
That motion passes. Next on the agenda is an appointment. I'd like to submit the following appointment for your approval to the Public Arts Commission. Stacy Robinson, for a term ending June 30th, 2019. Mr. Robinson is an assistant professor of design at the University of Illinois and teaches graphic design for the College of Fine and Applied Arts.
I'll move approval.
Second.
Moved by Jared, second by Eric. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Okay, that motion passes. Last item on the agenda, I would like a motion to go, for the City Council to go into closed session pursuant to the Open Meetings Act for 5 ILCS 120/2 subsection C5 regarding the release and waiver of a lease of real property for the use of the public body, including whether a particular parcel should be reacquired, and subsection C6 regarding the setting of a price for sale or lease of property owned by the city.
So moved.
I'll second that then.
Moved by moved by Jared, seconded by Dennis. All those in favor,
No,
please say
roll call.
aye.
Roll call. Aye.
Oh, roll call, sorry.
Councilmember Brown,
Yes.
Jacobson,
Yes.
Miller,
Yes.
Roberts,
Yes.
and Wu.
Yes.
That motion passes. And I will note that there will be no additional city business afterwards, so we will be just coming back here to adjourn the meeting.
Do I need to make a motion that we go back into open session?
Yes, please. Are we
I
all
would like
here?
to make that.
Okay.
I'll second it.
Moved by Dennis, seconded by Jared. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. With no further business before this body, this meeting is adjourned.
Okay.